Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down big ideas. Today, we're going to tackle a really important topic, setting boundaries. We're drawing from a source that looks at this through a pretty powerful personal and spiritual lens. All right, let's get right into it.
So let's kick things off with this really powerful image from our source material, a visit to the Korean demilitarized zone. I mean, think about it. This isn't just some line on a map. It's a real physical barrier, barbed wire. And it tells a whole story without saying a single word. It's a boundary that is absolutely real, with consequences that are just as real.
And you know, that's exactly why the DMZ works so well as a metaphor here. It shows us what a boundary is in its most raw, absolute form. It's just a line, right? But it defines where one world stops and another one starts. It's there to protect what's inside, and it makes it totally 100% clear what happens if you cross it.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. How does this idea of a stark physical line, like the DMZ, actually apply to our own lives, to the invisible lines we have to draw every day?
Well, the source defines a boundary line in these really direct terms. It's a mark that separates one world from another. And, just like crossing a physical border can be dangerous, crossing our own personal boundaries can have some pretty destructive results for our well-being and for our relationships. The experts Cloud and Townsend put it perfectly. They say that a lot of the confusion and chaos in our lives, it just comes down to not being clear on what's our responsibility and what isn't. Think of it like a property line on a map. It tells you exactly which lawn is yours to mow. We need those same kinds of lines, mentally, physically, and emotionally, to know what's ours to take care of. But, and this is a really crucial point, we have to get this next part right. Setting boundaries is not about building high walls to keep everybody out. That's a huge misconception. The real reason for them is actually way more subtle and honestly, way more powerful.
And this quote just nails it. It shows what boundaries are really for. A boundary isn't a wall, it's more like a fence with a gate. It means you are in control. You get to decide what comes in and what stays out. You can keep all the good stuff, your values, your time, your peace, safe and sound, while keeping the bad stuff out.
All right, so that's the big idea. Now let's bring it down to earth and see how this all plays out in our day-to-day lives and our relationships. So on a daily basis, boundaries are really about having a clear set of standards for how we act. It's about remembering that what we do affects other people. Our source points to timeless principles like the golden rule, right? Do to others what you would have them do to you. That's a pretty fundamental guideline for where we draw these lines every single day. Now, when we're talking about relationships, this is huge. The source really zeroes in on the power of a clear yes and a firm no. It sounds so simple, but man, it can be incredibly hard to do, right? But without that clarity, our relationships can get super chaotic and confusing, and that's where things like resentment and burnout start to creep in.
And you know, healthy relationships are all about finding that sweet spot. It's a balance. On one side, you've got intimacy, which is what builds community and connection. But on the other side, you need distance to protect yourself, your own space, your own identity. It's not an either-or thing. It's really more like a dance between the two.
And this need for boundaries, it isn't just about our jobs or our families. It goes deeper than that. It's about our internal world too. You know, our desires, what brings us pleasure, even our spiritual lives.
I mean, just think about pleasure. Seeking enjoyment is totally natural. But when there are no limits, no boundaries, it can go off the rails and become destructive. The source brings up the story of the prodigal son, which is a perfect example of this. Here's a guy who chased after every pleasure without a second thought. And where did it get him? Completely broke and empty.
And drawing from its faith perspective, the source material makes this point, well, pretty bluntly. It warns that if your life is only about chasing physical desires, with no spiritual or moral lines in the sand, it ultimately just leads to a dead end, a kind of spiritual emptiness. And if we go all the way to the core of this perspective, the most fundamental boundary of all is a spiritual one. It's the line between God as the creator and us as the created. It's about recognizing that there's a structure to things, and we have a place within it. We see this perfectly in the story of Adam and Eve. God gives them this incredible freedom, an entire garden to enjoy. But he sets one clear boundary, one rule. And that rule wasn't just there to be restrictive, it was a line drawn to protect them for their own good. But they crossed that line. And that single choice to step over a boundary that was meant to keep them safe had massive consequences. Which actually brings us to why respecting boundaries is so beneficial in the first place.
Okay, so let's pull all of this together. Let's get to the bottom line here. Why does any of this matter?
Why is this whole idea of setting and respecting boundaries so important?
This quote from 1 Corinthians really hits the nail on the head when it comes to mature freedom. It says, sure, I have the right to do anything, but not everything is beneficial. See, just because you can do something doesn't always mean you should. True freedom, from this point of view, isn't just about doing whatever you feel like. It's about using that freedom to think about others, about the greater good, and you can't do that without boundaries.
And really, this is the main takeaway. Setting boundaries is not a selfish thing to do. In fact, it's the total opposite. It's the foundation for a healthy life. When you set good boundaries, yeah, you benefit, but it ripples outward. Your family benefits, your neighbors and your community benefit. And in the end, the whole society we live in gets healthier and works better.
So as we wrap things up, the final question really is for you. It's something to think about personally. When you look at your own life, your work, your relationships, how you spend your time, your own mental health, where do you need to draw a clearer line? What boundary lines does your life need right now?